takes place at Taylor University, Saturday, April the 9th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. It is free. Okay, all you have to do is register. You can't just show up that morning. You gotta actually register. So, and you register at just isi.org, Indiana. So if you're interested in this, after we're done, stop by and pick one up. I've been to several of their conferences, typically one-day Saturday things. Over the course of the years, they've all been very, very good. You'll get to meet some students from other colleges and universities, faculty from other schools, and a good time will be had by all. So tonight, when Ryan sent me the email, I thought, well, I just talked to probably pretty much overlap a good portion of the same group the Tuesday before spring break. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I need to talk about something different. And so I expressed that idea, and Ryan's like, no, I want you to talk about the budget deficit. I'm like, okay, and he says, I want you to be like a raving lunatic about how actually awful things are. I'm like, well, that really shouldn't be too difficult. All you have to be is a rational human being talking about how bad things are, and of course, you will come off like a raving lunatic. Let's think about this for a minute. When you borrow money, what are you really doing? Making a promise, right? And the person that loans you the money is relying on that promise. So is it ever any good to make a promise that you know, or you should know, you can't keep? And you see, that is sort of at its most basic, where not just the United States, but if you go over to Western Europe, Portugal, Spain, Greece, France, Great Britain, pretty much any of the welfare state kind of nations in Western Europe, they're further down this road than we are. What they've done is they've made promises to folks that cannot be kept. Now, say, well, but if you make a promise, you should keep it. Well, of course. But that's all well and good and true, and we're not denying that. But what if you find yourself in a situation where someone has made a promise, and of course they should keep it, but if you look at all the evidence, they're not going to be able to. And I mean, it would be easier to turn stones into bread than to keep some of the promises that have been made. So what happens there is all the hand-wringing in the world about how they should keep their promises isn't going to do any good. Because you know what? That promise is not going to be kept. So the longer that we continue to plan our affairs, relying on that promise to be made good on, the harder it's going to be to adjust. So the sooner we face reality, the better. But, in Washington, why face reality today when you can put that off and leave the problem for somebody else? I mean, have you all ever procrastinated on a paper? We're sort of thinking, okay, if I put it off, it might go away. Yeah, I mean, where's the logic in procrastinating? We all know that. I mean, logically and rationally, it makes no sense. But yet, as human beings, we do it. See, that's sort of that interplay between, are we going to control ourselves and our desires, or are we going to let ourselves and our desires control us? That's sort of that constant battle that's always going on. So they're not facing it in Washington. And it's not just a problem in Washington. If you take a look at Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, even California, And I've like almost written California off. It's like, why should, look, if they want to think that, you can turn stones into bread and persist in that, it's a free country, let them. Just as long as they don't have to bail them out. But Costa Mesa, California, the city of Costa Mesa, you know what they just did? They just laid off half of their city workforce. There's a public defender from San Francisco, as liberal as you're going to find. And last November's election, he was behind a ballot initiative to basically cut back pension benefits to state employees. Now it lost, but he's a pretty determined guy. He's putting the same ballot initiative on the next ballot. He's going to keep doing it till it passes. Now he's a liberal, not a small government kind of guy at all, but he's a public defender. And he was seeing that pension and health care benefits for public employees were gradually gobbling up all the funds that he cared about. Funds that he could use as a public defender to advance certain sorts of, if you define social justice broadly enough, social justice kinds of goals and objectives. So even in California, we're seeing this play out. So it's not just at the federal level, it's also at the state level. And you guys, I was, as part of my planning, putting CDs in the player and letting them, MP3s and iPods, not to get those out yet. The CDs, I got a good handle on those. And, great economist John Mellencamp, his song, Not the Scarecrow, Minutes to Memories. Days come to minutes and minutes to memories. Life slips away the dreams that we have planned. You are young and you are the future, so suck it up and tough it out, be the best you can. Well, when that album came out in like 1984, I would listen, okay, I'm young and I'm the future. Well, now I'm like 50. So as you guys sit here and look at the kind of life, the kind of future that you have to look forward to, if there's not some sort of a course correction, there's going to be huge problems happening. Well, let's see if we can get a grip on that. February of 2011. You know what our budget deficit was for 1 month? February 2011. $223 billion for 1 month. Now, if you go prior to 2007, you can't find annual deficits that high. Okay, so we used to get up in arms during the Reagan administration. Annual deficit, $150 billion. Oh, woe is us, the end of the world is near. This is 1 month. Okay, now, let's think about that. Let's look at it in Japan. Japan already, there's what? There's almost 11,000 confirmed dead, and a little over 17,000 still missing. So, those missing folks, if they ain't found them yet, they're probably not going to find them alive. It's like, oh, like I was at Macy's shopping and, just got lost track of time. No, they're not going to find them. So we're talking, 28,000 dead folks. And you're getting daily updates about the nuclear reactor. And we're getting updated estimates of what it's going to cost to fix it. Japan's cabinet office, Wednesday of this week, they estimated $309 billion. So let's look at fixing Japan. Okay, that's one estimate. That's Japan's cabinet office. Okay, let's look at some other estimates. The World Bank came in at 235. That's Japan's cabinet office. That's the World Bank. And then Goldman Sachs, those pillars of virtue in the investment banking business, came in with 200 billion. Now you see this? This is interesting. You guys have all watched videos and read newspaper reports and such about what a colossal disaster happened in Japan. Look at 3 estimates of what it's going to cost to fix that disaster. So Japan is going to have to borrow and pay back, let's call it $250 billion, to fix their country. Compare that with what we borrowed in February at the federal level. So essentially, every month, till we get spending under control, every month we are doing, if you will, the equivalent in damage to our economy with the deficit we accumulate of a Japanese earthquake, tsunami. And you just look at the destructions. Boy, it's going to take a lot of money to rebuild this. Yeah, about $250 billion. They're going to have to borrow it. They're going to have to pay it back. What did we do in February? We borrowed $223 billion. So when you think about it that way, every month is like a mini Japanese earthquake. Okay? And you know, when I saw, I'd go home and talk to my wife at night and say, there's something, I just know too much. Ignorance really is bliss. I know too much about economics. If I knew less, the world's going to come crashing down someday anyway, whether I'm ignorant or smart. At least I would enjoy the time between now and then a whole lot more, if I was more ignorant. Sometimes I wish I thought, demand was just somebody who was being unreasonable, instead of being a part of demand and supply analysis. But I can't reverse the course. Okay? So let's look at some more data. Federal spending, this is in the year projected for 2010 is an actual number. Federal spending per household. See, those of you that are here before spring break, this is how I introduced variety. I did it per person then, so per household makes a difference. Okay, back in 1965, when I was 5 years old, and your mom and dad didn't even know each other yet, most likely. 11,337. For the year of 2011, current year, 31,088. And then projected for the year 2020, all the way up to 36,139. And you may think, well, what about inflation? Well, these numbers are in 2009 dollars. So inflation has been removed from that. So the federal government today is spending about 3 times as much per household as what it was in 1965. Spending projected to go up. It's about a $5,000 difference. We'll call it between 15 and 20%. See, we're borrowing $1.6 trillion this year. Oh, well, yeah, I guess that could be a problem. But you know what we'll do? Let's just plan on up and spending between 15 and 20% in the next decade. Now, I was born in 1960. I'll be 60 years old by 2020. I'd like to have, nice golden years to play shuffleboard and complain about the government and wear pants up to my, I like it. But you know what? If I don't get that, well, I can deal with that. Because you know what? I'm 50 now. I got to enjoy a good half century of relative sanity. Okay? You guys, what? You guys are all in probably your early 20s. Don't you want to get married, raise a family, all that normal stuff? If we don't change, and change radically, that's not gonna happen. So I don't like change. But you know what? People used to say there's only two things in life that you count on. Death and taxes. Well, what's the third one? Change. I said the only constant in life is what? Change. Now, this isn't going to be easy because we're going to look more closely here at what has to be cut, what has to be changed. If all we had to do is close the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, and what have you, and the Environmental Department, EPA, if that's all we had to do, it'd be easy. But there's this thing called an entitlement program we're going to look at, and that's where the real disaster is. So, we're in 2010, about 3.7 trillion is what we're going to spend. We're going to collect about 2.15 trillion. So this number here, our best estimate, 3.70. That's our best estimate of our $1.55 trillion deficit coming up. Now, you know, the Clinton era, what a wild and exciting time. You guys would have been like watching, you've just been outgrowing Bob the Builder, Barney, probably. And you know, Mommy, what is a stained dress? You know, he has all those kinds of questions. Probably asking your parents and creating all sorts of awkward moments you didn't even fully appreciate. Okay? The Clinton era has not been that long ago, has it? But if you go back and check, during the Clinton era, what did we do? We actually had a surplus. We had a federal government that was bringing in more than it was spending. Now, does that mean things were all well and good then? No. Because, see, we have the actual recorded deficit, but we also have promises we've made but don't yet show up as on-the-book liabilities. I mean, think about it. When you get married and have your first child, when you bring that little bundle home from the hospital, you may think, well, yeah, I owe the hospital like $1,000, my insurance deductible. No, your liability actually went up more now. Because now you're what? You're responsible for raising that child till maturity. Okay, till 18. You know, because maturity doesn't give it to you. No, don't necessarily. You can't kick it. You're mature at 7, out you go, Johnny. And you don't need to stay until 40 if they're not, okay? So let's go to 18, but think about that. What is the discounted present value of taking care of little Johnny or Janie for 18 years? And you throw on 4 years of college after that? You know, every time that little bundle of joy comes in present value terms, you're obligated to raise them. The present value of that obligation is about $40,000 to $45,000. Okay? But does that show up? If you did a financial statement, does that show up? You know, assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity? You know, near and dear to our heart, like E equals MC squared, right? And I have no idea what that second equation even means. But the first one I've got a pretty good handle, okay? But does that show up as a liability? And you see, that comes straight out of your net worth. Because, you know, for those first years, you can't even have to mow the yard or shovel the snow. He just like wakes you up at night and you have to go rocking back to sleep. So, you know, it's going to be 10 years before it even becomes an asset. So, I mean, that, even when our budgets were balanced in the Clinton era, those off-balance sheet liabilities were growing. See, this is where you think everything's healthy. I was watching HGTV Sunday night. Homes on Homes. And this couple bought this house. They're in a bidding war with 10 other couples. The 9 couples that won were the couples that got outbid. Because this was a rooming house. Somebody had flipped it. They went in and bought it. And they covered up all the bad stuff with a really neat looking exterior. And they bought it. And it said that the termites didn't quit working just because they covered them up. Actually, probably worked faster and harder. So this house, there was a $150,000 problem that was hidden from view. Just because you didn't know about it, weren't aware of it, did that mean the problem wasn't there? No. So you see, even during the time that the budget was balanced there in the early part of the last part of the 1900s, we were not in good shape. Okay, let's see here. What's the next thing will shock you? From 1970 to 1988, adjusting for inflation, that's not 1988. 2008. I was 20 years off. From 1970 to 2008, that's 38 years, federal spending grew by 242%. So in real dollars, after taking out the effect of inflation, every dollar that was spent in 1970, if it grew by 242%, we were spending $3.42 in 2008. Because 100% growth would take that dollar and make it $2. So this much growth for every dollar here, add 242% to that, we're spending $3.42. Now, what about household income? Up by 29% in real terms. So for household income, for every dollar of household income in 1970, there was $1.29 in 2008 after controlling for inflation. And you see the problem here? Because ultimately, it was the federal government. Remember that phrase, government of the people, by the people, for the people, blah, blah, blah? See, the government, at the end of the day, the government is not something separate and autonomous from us. The government is us. So, what the government spends, we have to pay for it. This is the same thing that happened in the housing crisis. You had house prices going up faster than wages. See, where is federal spending ultimately paid for? By the households that comprise the country. So this has been a gradually brewing problem for quite some time. Am I scared yet? So this is like health, education and healthcare. Government spending vastly outpacing inflation. Now, what's going on April the 8th? And you're like, well, that's the day I prepared for that economics conference on the 9th. And I'm like, okay, you will be doing that. Think a little bigger. What's going on April the 8th? There's a 3-week continuing resolution. It's going to expire. And that expires on April the 8th, and if they don't do something else, spending authority disappears. See, federal spending comes out in 2 categories. Wasteful and inefficient. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Well, actually, only kind of kidding. See, you hear, John Boehner, Speaker of the House, talking about, well, we've got $6 billion in cuts for this 3-week extension, and you hear Charlie Schumer when he thinks that the press is not on, saying, well, I always use the word extreme to describe these here folks, not because they're, because I was told to, and it plays well in the press. Okay, all they're looking at is discretionary spending. How much are we going to give the Defense Department? How much are we going to give the Agriculture Department? This is where the real problem is. Now, the entitlements, there's three areas. Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. Okay, Social Security is it's basically a government-funded pension. Medicare is basically health care for retirees, and Medicaid is health care for younger folks, pre-retirement age, that are economically disadvantaged. And what we're going to find is, we'll look at the numbers. Social Security ain't great, but the entitlement problem is almost entirely in Medicaid and Medicare. And see, the thing is, and another thing, entitlements are these, but along with another non-discretionary item that's also, it's not really an entitlement, we've got to pay interest on the national debt. That would be another thing to include here. But back in 1965, we had total spending of $604 billion. About $400 billion of that was discretionary, and about $200 was mandatory. Okay, in 2010, we've got total spending of about $3.5 trillion. Okay, how much of that's discretionary? How much is mandatory? The discretionary part is about $1.4 trillion. The non-discretionary part is about $2.1 trillion. See, the non-discretionary stuff swallows up almost all of our tax collections. Now, up here, if we shut down, a cowboy poetry festival in Nevada, that was one of the things that Harry Reid talked about. Most of us can live without that. Cowboys and poetry, anyway. Come on. Or, shut down, studying, some aquatic species in Lake Superior, or something like that. Don't buy as many cruise missiles. Down here, this non-discretionary stuff, this happens whether the federal government does anything or not. See, you know what these are? These are promises that were made a long time ago, and they just automatically keep going. Until we're ready to deal with this. See, right now, the Republicans, they want to cut about $66 billion, and the Democrats want to cut about $0 billion. And so they're willing to compromise with about $30 billion of phantom cuts that really don't exist. But here's what you want to understand. The press out there, all the stuff, all this battle, all this fighting, this is like in the Texas Panhandle about 6 years ago. They had a bunch of wildfires and burnt more real estate than what Rhode Island has. And so you got these big old fires going, and you've got like all the fire marshals, at a Love's truck stop on I-40, making sure that all the truckers are using sand when they put out their cigarettes. I mean, that's exactly it. You've got the entire Texas Panhandle ablaze, but where's everybody focusing all their attention? On this minor, insignificant, yeah, it's a fire, but it really shouldn't be getting any attention. Oh, see, this is where all the fighting is up here. Well, now, what would you think about it? You've heard those commercials where the guy's supposed to go to the doctor and it's not, He walks in, it's like, is that an alligator that's got a hold of your leg? Yeah, I probably ought to do something about that someday. I can still get around. Well, when you I know it's too busy to do that right now. Okay, Fred, is that a sunflower growing out of your head? Well, yeah, it is. I've been really busy. I'll get to that someday. When you ignore the obvious and you pretend by looking at something inconsequential and insignificant that you're actually making real progress, what are you doing? Aren't you lying to yourself? Aren't you deceiving yourself? You go into marriage counseling. And let's say the husband, likes to go out to bars and chase after women that are not his wife. And the wife likes to go spend money like there's no tomorrow. And they go to the marriage counselor and they continue to talk about why she always fixes fish on Friday and he wants tenderloins. And that's where they spend all their time talking. Well, what are they doing? Aren't they deceiving themselves? Now, see, that's interesting for me. Because if I go read in Romans chapter 1, starting about verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness, what do? Suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking. Okay, futile thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Then Paul goes on to write in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, starting at verse 18, going to verse 25. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Now Paul's talking about something other than, more directly than economics in those two passages. But I think it points to the capacity of fallen human nature to deceive themselves. And so I think there's a theological explanation that helps us understand this. I mean, we want to believe. I mean, why do you vote for politicians that promise things you know can't be? You want to believe it's true. Why do people continue to buy Enron stock when the results that were being reported say, well, what does this company do? I don't know. Maybe like get oil or something. I have no idea. Well, explain to me, in a sentence or less, how they create value. What do they do that justifies the earnings they're reporting? I have no idea. But look at their financial statements. It's like, I know, but doesn't that look like it's too good to be true? It's like, but I really want to believe it's true. You see, shame on Enron for deceiving the people. But shame on the people for being so easily deceived. But you see, that is what we are as a nation right now when you look at the debt problem. We're deceiving ourselves. We are not paying attention to obvious problems, and we're instead of focusing on minor problems. We're convincing ourselves that by doing that, we're doing something good. We're not. until we're willing to deal with this, you guys' future is going to be a whole lot different than mine. Mine was. My future's now past. Something like that. Now, let's take a look. Let's throw in the state and local governments, just for fun. Because you already looked at the federal number. State and local government spending in the year 2009, $47,000 per household. Now think about that. You take all the spending by all the state and local governments, add the federal government to it, divide it up by the number of households in America, that averages out to $47,000 a household. Okay, so on average, if we're going to run a balanced budget, what does average tax collections have to be per household? $47,000. But you want to buy a house, right? And you want to eat some food, and you want food to be other than Campbell's pork and beans. Okay, we can have a banana for breakfast, pork and beans for lunch, and day-old bread from Aunt Millie's, for supper. It's no, you want a little bit more than that, right? Oh, but I got to pay my $47,000 first. Average spending, 2009, federal, state, local government, $47,000 per household. What was the line from Star Trek? Scotty, beam me up. Okay, except there was no place for us to be beamed to. I mean, we have no self-discipline. It's no wonder that we're a nation, of overweight people. It's well, I'm not full, I'm not really hungry, but I see that and it looks good, I must have it. And it's no wonder we're a nation that overspending. I see it, I don't need it, but I see it, I want it, I must have it. And I suppose, I don't know if oversexed is the right word, but a nation sex outside of the proper context, which is once you get married and stay married to the same person for the rest of your life. See, we lack self-discipline all the way around. We're not going to go back and cite those same passages from before the break, because those of you who are there remember, what did we say? Self-control is what? It's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. In other words, it's not a part of fallen humanity to be self-controlled. That is why fasting is a spiritual discipline. It's not because going hungry is in any sense virtuous. If it was, like Africa be the most virtuous country, on the face of the earth, and Sudan would just be reeking virtue right now because of all the hunger there. No, that's not it at all. But here's the deal. If you can learn to discipline your body and its urges. I see, I want, I must have. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Follow me. Say, okay, I see, I want, but I'm not going to have. See, if you can learn to control your body and its urges when it comes to eating, then you can transfer that to control your body and its urges when it comes to spending, sexual activity, whatever. But you see, we may have "In God We Trust" wrote on our coins, but we're not a nation of born-again Christians if you look at our behavior and our habits, unless it's a different gospel than what I'm talking about. Okay, let's look a little bit more here at entitlements. That's where the problem is. Does anybody know the history of Social Security and Medicare? When did it first start? I mean, was this something like, Washington and Jefferson? They're sitting there and they invited old, Ben Franklin to come over. And he said, I'm busy inventing a stove. And they're like, come anyway, because they're at a campfire. And, they're talking. It's like, well, we really ought to do something about that slavery issue. I know, but, we can only do so much right now. We can put that off. Let's do that 3/5 thing. That'll keep the South in check. Like, yeah, and you know what? What about old age retirement and disability? We ought to do something about that, too. I mean, think about that. George, that battle of, well, whichever battle is, I think it was Trenton over in New Jersey. I mean, you're still walking with a little limp there. You're not getting around as good as you did. We need to provide old age disability. So, yeah, I know. But let's let Roosevelt worry about that. I mean, do you think that our founding fathers were thinking about that? No. No, they weren't. It's like if we wanted somebody to take care of us from the cradle to the grave, make all the decisions for us, and give all our freedom to you if you take care of us. We'd have never rebelled against King George now, would we? So the 1930s, when all this stuff came up. Now, think about this. My grandpa, Harry Ivo Lemler. I'm really glad my mom and dad didn't pick Grandpa's middle name for mine. You know, Kirk I can live with. Ivo would have taken some work. I would still probably have issues if they had picked that. But Grandpa was born in 1895. So he collected a lot of Social Security. But you know what? Poof. When that came into being in the early 1930s, did they say, okay, now we're just starting this. But you realize if you're like 65 now, you're not going to get anything because you haven't paid into it. But you young folks, you can start paying into it now. Is that how they started it? Phased it in like that? No. Social Security has always been pay as you go. There were folks that all of a sudden this is passed. It's like, whoa, this is a great country or what? Because they started getting something they never paid into. So this notion of a trust fund, a lockbox, whatever you want to call it, has been mere illusion. Because how did the budget deficit get camouflaged for a lot of years? When Social Security had more money coming in than what was going out, what did they do with that extra money? See, because back then, they weren't keen on buying General Motors or Chrysler. Okay, because you see, when the government owns all the corporations, what do we call that? Socialism, I think. So you see, the federal government said, we got all this money over here in Social Security side. Because all this money's coming in, very little's going, what are we going to do with it? They bought federal government debt. So the Social Security Trust Fund was always full of federal government debt. The Social Security side was what? Loaning money to the operating side. So any distinction between those two has always been a false distinction. Now, what happened toward the end of World War II from about 1945 to 1960? I got in on the tail end of it and I didn't have any choice. It was all up to mom and dad. The baby boom. That's like this big old hunk of people. Now look at the problem that set up. It was great, wasn't it, when the baby boomers were all working. You got a bunch of people working, and you got very few people retired. This is pay as you go. If you got a bunch of people working, what can you do to the people that are retired? You can give them a really good retirement benefit, and it doesn't cost the working folks a whole lot. Why? Because there's relatively few working folks. But now thinking further ahead, you're saying, wait a minute. What if there's like no baby boom after the baby boom? What happens when those folks retire? What happens when we got a lot of people retired and very few people working? Is that going to work so well? So, well, but these people have paid in for years. Yes, they paid in for years, but that money get invested like your 401k? No, it did not. That money they were paying in was constantly doing what? Going out to pay benefits to retirees or loan it to the operating side of the federal government. That is where we're at now. If you're born in 45, here in 2011, let's check my math, you'd be 66. The baby boomers are just now starting to retire. Is it any coincidence that the wheels are now starting to fall off of entitlement programs in earnest? Every 3 months, I get a little statement from Social Security telling me what my benefit will be if I retire like at age 65, age 68, I forget what the different numbers are. You know what that is? It's kind of like, if you promise a little kid, here, you want some candy? They come to grab it, take it, and you pull it away. Because you have no intention of ever giving it to them. What they are promising me, I'm never going to collect. I know too much. It's not going to happen. Here's where we're at. In 1965, this is going to compare national defense and entitlements. In 1965, national defense was 7.4% of GDP, what we spent on national defense. And Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid was 2.5%. So in 1965, defense, 7.4% of GDP. And then your entitlements so low? Well, the baby boom had just ended 5 years ago. None of those people were retired yet. Okay? So in 65, the Defense Department's about 3 times what Social Security is. Now let's go forward to 2010. Entitlements are now roughly times 4, 1/10 of our nation's gross domestic product goes to entitlements. 3 things: Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. And the Defense Department roughly times 2/3, 4.9%. So we went from defense 3 times entitlements to now entitlements twice defense. See, do we need all those fancy new weapon systems? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, is there savings in defense? I'm sure there is. But the point is, when you look at the two, defense is probably not the place we're going to be able to reap most of the same. Even if Ron Paul had his way, this is not going to go all the way to 0. Okay? And this is still here, like that python that got loose in New York City. Oh, yeah. Yes. Now, you guys have heard about these things called earmarks. That's like, yeah, I know you went to get your ear pierced and it went bad. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an earmark. It's like, well, I had a friend that wrestled in high school, he got a cauliflower ear. That is not it either. An earmark has nothing to do with these things. Okay, what is an earmark? That is when a representative or a senator puts a specific project, a specific item in a spending bill that goes back to his district. So an earmark is dedicated benefits to help get you reelected. Now we've heard that earmarks are a big old problem, and they're not good. You know how many earmarks there were in 2010? There were 9,499. That's the number. How much do you think all those earmarks total? Our deficit's 1.6 trillion. All the earmarks is what? 1/1000th of our budget deficit. And we're spending a lot of time, fighting over earmarks? Like that is going to right the ship? You've all heard the phrase, rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. Say, okay, yes, it's aggravating when they, build a bridge to nowhere in Alaska. It's aggravating when, okay, Winona Lake's got one post office, but hey, we've got, a good representative, let's get 2 or 3 more. Okay, we don't need those, and we shouldn't have them, but it's more money than any of us are ever going to see. But in terms of the entire federal budget, see, where we spend, if you look, another phrase, more heat than light, if you look at the areas that get the attention, all the areas they fight over, and so, we've got $6 billion. By golly, that is real spending cuts. $6 billion over 3 weeks. Federal government borrows over $7 billion a day. Yeah, that's exactly what the Tea Party was up in arms with. And you know what? Those are extremist folks. You're exactly right. When we're borrowing over $7 billion a day and they want to cut $6 billion over 3 weeks, that's the ultimate definition of extreme in my view. Right, Chuck. Most dangerous place to be. Most dangerous place to be is between Chuck Schumer and a microphone. You'll get mowed over. And I mean, yeah, we probably should. I'm not like picking on it. I'm just stating the fact. Okay, what about taxes per household? What about taxes? 2009, the average household paid about $16,500 in taxes. Now, back in 2000, that was up to over $23,000. So why did it go down? The economy went in the tanks. So when your income goes down, your taxes go down. But still, in 2009, this is adjusted for inflation. 2009, the average household about 16,500. In 1965, average household 11,200. Okay, but remember back to what federal spending was per household? As outrageous as those numbers are, it's a whole lot less than what federal spending was. Now, see, what's the purpose of government? We talk about this in this particular room, chapters 5 and 6 of the textbook. What are the basic rules of government? Protect people, protect their property. And you know, you get beyond that, it gets open to debate. I mean roads. The first roads in America were toll roads. Higher education. First colleges in America were private. I mean, once you get beyond protection of people and property, you know, the roles and functions of government are up for debate. But if all we were doing was collecting and spending money to do stuff like that, our budget would be a lot smaller. But what is one of the other things that, shall we say, social engineers? This is not like a mechanical engineer. A mechanical engineer is how to like build things. This is a social engineer, it's a different kind of thing. Okay, it's not even like a train engineer. But a social engineer, one of the things they want to do is what? Redistribute income. See, William Tell, was it Robin Hood or William Tell? Which one took from the rich and gave to the poor? Whichever, yeah, Robin, and he was the first social engineer. He should be like, instead of a donkey, you know, the Democratic Party should have like, you know, Robin Hood as their mascot. Okay? But here's where we're at. 2007 is the last year we have data. See, you can only get, you know, so much out of your taxpayers. In 2007, the top 1% of taxpayers paid 40%